As the sun set over the vast Pacific Ocean, casting long shadows over the war-torn islands, Japanese soldiers found themselves huddled in damp caves and makeshift shelters, their gaunt faces etched with the unmistakable signs of prolonged hunger. It was 1944, and the tide of World War II had turned decisively against Imperial Japan. What had started as a bold campaign of conquest across the Pacific was now a desperate struggle for survival, not just against Allied forces, but also against the merciless grip of starvation. The island of Peleliu, where one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War raged from September to November 1944, was one such place where the horror of hunger became all-consuming. Japanese defenders resorted to eating coral limestone, grinding their teeth away in a futile effort to quell their hunger pangs. On the other hand, the dense jungles of islands like Banaba and the Solomon Islands presented unprecedented challenges for Japanese soldiers who found themselves cut off and unable to receive the much-needed supplies. They were reduced to eating roots, grasses, and even tree bark to stave off hunger. By early 1944, the situation had become dire across the Pacific. On Banaba, the soldiers stumbled upon a field of wild taro in March of that year. It sparked a brief moment of elation before the realization set in that the improperly prepared plant was toxic, leading to agonizing deaths. Lieutenant Yoshihiko Yamamoto, a survivor of the Banaba campaign, later recounted in his memoirs, "We envied the dead, for they no longer felt the growing pain in their bellies. Each day we grew weaker, our uniforms hanging loose on our skeletal frames." Yamamoto's words echoed the sentiment of countless soldiers across the Pacific. As supply lines crumbled under Allied pressure, the soldiers' bodies wasted away. The island of Kolombangara, north of New Georgia, saw soldiers boiling their leather belts into a gelatinous soup, desperately seeking any form of nutrition. The grim reality of starvation extended far beyond Banaba, touching every corner of the Pacific theater. On Guadalcanal, the site of one of the war's most brutal campaigns, an estimated 10,000 Japanese soldiers perished from malnutrition and related diseases between August 1942 and February 1943. The lush tropical environment teeming with life became a cruel irony as soldiers lacked the knowledge to safely forage. In October 1942, a group of Japanese soldiers consumed unfamiliar berries, resulting in severe poisoning that claimed several lives. As supplies dwindled, soldiers resorted to more extreme measures. On New Guinea, troops boiled their leather belts and shoes in an effort to extract nutrients. In the Marshall Islands, desperate men mixed sawdust with small amounts of sugar, hoping to ease the hunger gnawing at their insides. These desperate measures often led to severe digestive issues, further weakening already malnourished bodies. In November 1943, during the fierce battle for Tarawa Atoll, Japanese defenders were found to have subsisted on a diet of palm fronds and small reef fish in the weeks leading up to the American invasion. While the Japanese High Command was aware of the dire situation, they prioritized strategic objectives and the war effort, meaning many garrisons were effectively abandoned. Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, Japan's Navy minister, grimly acknowledged the situation during a private meeting in 1944, stating, "We send these men to die, not by the sword, but by the slow, cruel hand of hunger." This sentiment was echoed by General Hideki Tojo, who admitted to his staff, "Our supply lines are our Achilles heel. We ask our soldiers to accomplish the impossible, to fight not only the enemy, but their own bodies." Perhaps nowhere was the situation more desperate than on the island of Chichi Jima, part of the Ogasawara Islands. As American forces closed in during the summer of 1944, the 25,000 Japanese defenders found themselves completely cut off. By August, rations had been reduced to just 100 grams of rice per day, supplemented by local plants and small animals. Rear Admiral Kunizo Mori, the island's commander, implemented a strict rationing system, prioritizing combat-ready troops while support personnel and civilians were left to scavenge what they could from the island's limited resources. The situation reached its most desperate point on the Philippine island of Leyte, where fierce fighting raged from October 1944 to August 1945. An estimated 80% of Japanese casualties were due to starvation and disease rather than combat. Similar patterns emerged across the Pacific theater. On New Guinea, entire Japanese units simply vanished into the jungle, their fate unknown until years after the war when patrol officers stumbled upon bleached bones and rusted equipment. By early 1945, the situation had become so dire that even Japan's stoic military culture began to fray. Incidents of insubordination and desertion, once rare, became increasingly common. On Iwo Jima, as the American invasion loomed, General Tadamichi Kurabayashi authorized his men to surrender if they ran out of food and ammunition. A stark departure from the traditional expectation of fighting to the death. In a letter to his wife, found after the battle, Kurabayashi wrote, "The men dig and wait. Their stomachs empty, but their hearts full of resolve. How long can flesh and blood endure when pitted against steel and fire?" The psychological toll of prolonged starvation was immense. Soldiers reported hallucinations, extreme irritability, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness. Medical officers, working with severely limited supplies, documented cases of night blindness, beriberi, and other nutritional diseases. As the war ground to its inevitable conclusion in the summer of 1945, tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers remained scattered across the Pacific, many still unaware that their country had surrendered. On the island of Lubang in the Philippines, Lieutenant Hiro Onoda and 3 other soldiers continued to hide in the jungle, surviving on a diet of bananas, coconuts, and occasional stolen cattle. Onoda would not emerge to surrender until 1974, nearly 3 decades after the war's end. His story, while extreme, illustrates the lasting impact of the war's privations. Upon his return to Japan, Onoda remarked, "I had learned to live with hunger as a constant companion. It was harder to learn to live with plenty." In 1944, on the remote island of Chichi Jima, a horrifying descent into cannibalism would unfold, leaving a dark stain on the history of World War II. The island, once a peaceful haven for settlers and traders, had been transformed into a fortress by the Japanese military. Under the command of Major General Yoshio Tachibana, Chichi Jima became the site of one of the most grotesque episodes of the war. Chichi Jima was of strategic importance to Japan as it served as a communications hub. The island's radar and radio facilities were crucial for Japanese operations across the Pacific, making it a prime target for Allied forces. As American bombers relentlessly pounded the island's defenses and submarines choked off supply lines, the specter of starvation loomed large. By July 1944, Japanese soldiers on Chichi Jima were surviving on less than 400 calories a day, subsisting primarily on bark, roots, and the occasional small animal. It was in this context of desperation that the first acts of cannibalism occurred. On August 31, 1944, an American B-24 bomber was shot down over the island, and its 9-man crew was captured. One of the crew members, Navy radioman 3rd Class Marv Marion, was beheaded, and parts of his liver were served at a sake-fueled feast for senior officers. This gruesome ritual would be repeated with other prisoners in the coming days, with officers rationalizing these acts as a means of boosting troop morale and demonstrating contempt for the enemy. Major Suo Matoba, one of the key figures in the atrocities, later justified the acts by claiming they were a means of boosting morale. This chilling rationalization underscored the extreme psychological stress under which the Japanese forces were operating, where traditional moral boundaries had eroded in the face of imminent defeat. As more Allied airmen were captured, their fate became increasingly clear. Navy Airman Floyd Hall and Army Air Force's Sergeant Warren Earl Vaughan were both executed and consumed by officers in September 1944. Each execution was carried out with military formality, but the acts were marked by a brutal ritual that highlighted the moral confusion gripping the Japanese forces. The executions were not random acts of savagery, but calculated decisions made by military leaders. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Chichi Jima incident was the methodical nature of the killings. These were not acts of random violence, but rather deliberate decisions to use prisoners as both intelligence assets and potential food sources. Lieutenant Junior Grade William L. Connell was kept alive for several weeks and interrogated repeatedly before being executed on October 1st. The last victim, Army Air Force's Sergeant Donald Malloy, was killed on October 3, 1944. The full extent of the Chichi Jima atrocities only came to light after Japan's surrender in August 1945. As American forces occupied the island, they were confronted with evidence of the horrific crimes that had been committed there. Exhumations revealed the mutilated remains of the airmen and survivors. Among the Japanese ranks began to speak out about the atrocities. One of the key figures in revealing the truth about Chichi Jima was Lieutenant George Onichi, a Japanese naval officer who had been stationed on the island. His testimony provided crucial evidence that helped piece together the events of those terrible months. In the years following the war, the story of Chichi Jima would become a symbol of the moral breakdown that occurred within the Japanese military during the war. General Yoshio Tachibana, the man responsible for overseeing these atrocities, was eventually brought to trial for his role in the cannibalism. His reign of terror on Chichi Jima would go down in history as one of the darkest chapters of World War II. The horrors faced by Japanese soldiers in the Pacific during World War II remain a testament to the extreme conditions of war and the brutal measures that can arise in the face of starvation and desperation. From the cannibalism on Chichi Jima to the grinding hunger experienced on other islands across the Pacific, these events serve as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which humanity can be pushed under the most dire of circumstances. As we reflect on the history of these dark moments, it is essential to remember the victims and the survivors who endured unimaginable suffering. The lessons learned from these tragedies should continue to serve as a reminder of the importance of compassion, understanding, and the value of human dignity even in the most trying times.